Okay, hello and welcome everybody. My name is Ben Munson with FarmQA. I'm a senior technology specialist, and today I will be walking you through our crop planning for 2022. This is a continuation of our webinar series where we're going to be touching on relevant topics to the season as we go forward. And we thought it would be relevant to present to you the content that we have pertaining to crop planning, and we're going to be focusing on a few different things, but we'll start out by walking through how to create a new growing season within FarmQA, add any crops, varieties that you may need to add in the new season, and then we'll walk through how you can start to do crop assignments, looking at crop rotation reports, and then we'll round up by doing some chemical planning as well. So that's the goal. I want to spend most of the time in the product, as that will speak for itself as I start to walk through this webinar here. If you have questions at any time, feel free to ask in the chat and we will answer those at the end of the webinar. With that said, I'm going to jump over to our product. What you're looking at here is what we call FarmQA Controller. This is our web view. This is where we will do a fair amount of our account setup. We will be showing as well on the mobile side how the crop assignments will display in our application that runs on iOS and Android as well. Starting out, the first thing I'm going to walk through is how to set up a new growing season. So if we're going to do a crop plan, in this case, we're going to want to set up a 2022 growing season. So that's going to be done within our settings tab. And then I'm going to go over to growing season. On the left-hand side, you see all of my current growing seasons I have within FarmQA and a status or a state associated to each one of those. To add a new season, there's a plus button on the bottom, and I have the opportunity to duplicate a season or create a new season. The biggest difference here is the duplicate will take all the crop assignments from the selected season. So in this case, I have 2021 highlighted in blue, and the new growing season will create a blank or a brand new season without any crop assignments. So what we can do with this tool is I'll actually select 2022 and then do a duplicate. Assuming that my crop rotation, perhaps I'm on a 2-year rotation, I can still make tweaks as we go forward here, but some of these assignments may be correct, therefore reducing the amount of assignments I'll be needing to do. So I've done that, and now I get the opportunity to name the season, and I can give it a state. I'm going to make this active because I know we're going very soon into the 2022 season. As I save this, this is now a season within FarmQA. For the sake of the demo, I will also create a new growing season, which is the blank season I described, but we will call this one 2023 and leave this state as draft. Once I've saved that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump back to the map, and I'll show you with the toggle on the top right how we now have those 2 newly added growing seasons available to select. And if I click on 2022, we see crops assigned, and these happen to be the same assignments that I had in 2020, and I just essentially copy and pasted them into the new year. Whereas if you recall, the 2023 is what I would consider a blank season, where you see no assignments at all. So you can choose which option fits best for you throughout this process. Okay, now that the season is created, we can start to look at doing assignments, and there's a couple of ways that we can do this. The first would be from the map view. So if you're looking spatially and looking at where you have crops planted, our legend is going to show you the color code corresponding to the crops. And this screen is if we want to zoom in and select any given field, we can now edit the field, and this would allow us to adjust the shape. We can update a new boundary, but in this case, I simply want to select a new crop. So instead of beets, I'm going to say this field is going to go into corn. And beyond that, you see my list of varieties here as well. I can select what variety I want planted in this field. Clicking save, you can see the color updated, and in the details pane, we see what variety is planted in this field. So that's the process for a single assignment. We have a bulk workflow as well. So if you're on the map view, and what I did there is I slid out the map detail pane, and now I can assign crops in bulk by multi-selecting fields. And now I can say all 3 of those fields that I have selected are going to go into, in this case, beets, or sorry, 4 fields, and you can see the acreage total automatically calculated. And as I click assign, we're going to see all those fields change and take that update. Those are the two ways to do it from the map. An alternative way would be to do it from the field list view. What I've done now is I've clicked on the Fields tab, and again, I'm still in the 2022 season. And what I get in this screen is I can see which crops are assigned based on the color. What I'm going to do is I'm going to group these crops or these rows by the crop, so I can see which fields are going into beets for this year, and then varieties. For a lot of these fields, I don't have varieties assigned, as you can see, so I can go through and do this in a bulk process by selecting. And from this screen, now that we have these 4 fields selected, if I go up to our action pane from the list view, this is where you can see the green leaf button allows us to assign a crop. And if I want to just assign a variety, I grab that from within the list and I can assign that. If I want to change assignments altogether, let's say a series of these cornfields need to be planted in soybeans for the 2022 year, I can search and I can assign from this view. Actually, I'll grab a variety. And now you can see those fields flipped. Instead of being corn, they're going to be now in my soybean section, which you can see is down here, and those 3 varieties that I assigned. So that comes down to user preference on how you want to do the assignments within the program, whether it's from the map or the list view. But those are 2 options that are available. Another thing to note from the list view or the map view is that instead of just grouping these by crop, we can also group them by variety. So if we want to be looking at the varieties, you can see that they now become the groups over here, and we can see which fields are associated to each variety. And we can search, if we want to say just show me the beet fields, I've searched beets, and now we see the breakdown by variety shown here. On the map view, the concept works very similarly in the sense that by default, we're color coding by crop, as you heard me reference. But as I bring out the map details, we also have an alternative coloring scheme, which would be by the variety. And now you can see I don't have many varieties assigned, but if I do show that same beet example that I had in the list view, the map will now show us the different colors, in this case, different shades of red that represent the different beet varieties. The number in parentheses tells you the number of fields that are planted in that variety with the acreage total next to it as well. That's the process of assigning. Let's talk to the scenario now where you were assigning crops and perhaps you've got new varieties or even new crops that you're planning to plant in this new season. What we can do in that scenario is we'll go back into the settings tab and into the crop/varieties tab. Within here, you can see a similar list to what I had in the assignment window. But what I'll do now is if I go into the corn section and I click on this plus button on the right-hand side, I can now add a new variety within my corn crop. So what I'll do is we'll just call this a variety called FarmQA BT, and I have the option to use the default scouting form or template associated to corn, or I can assign a custom template. And I can also choose to use the default color, or I can use, like I was doing before, different shades of yellow to represent the different varieties. So now we can see FarmQA BT as a variety. The other scenario I described is if you have a different crop altogether, there's a blue plus button in the bottom right. If I click on that, we can now say we are planting winter wheat in 2022, and we can assign both the crop and what we call the master crop and assign a template to this field. I'm just going to use the general template and say that I want all my winter wheat fields to show up as pink. Now that is a new crop within our system. Right down at the bottom, you can see winter wheat. And now if we go into an assignment window, this would allow us to assign either winter wheat, like you saw me create before. So there's the winter wheat crop I can assign, or we can assign the new variety that I created. So if I come to the drop down, this time we're going to search the direct variety, and now we can see that that shows up, and I can assign it to a field. So that would be the process of adding both crops and varieties. A few additional things that I will point out when we talk about crop planning would be if you do have a field that needs to be split. So for example, we're going to call out this field 193. And let's say in 2021, this field was planted and cropped as a whole quarter section. But in this case, we know that it needs to get split. We have a splitting tool And when we do this, it's only going to impact the boundary for the 2022 season, since that's the year we have selected. So within our details of the field, we see the edit field, but then we also see the more option. Underneath more is where we have the split tool. If I click on this, it will automatically split the field based on equal representation of acreage. So this finds a 50-50 split of the field and creates two different versions. Now what we can do is we can grab either one of these and we can rename it. So I can say 193 South. And let's say in this case, I didn't want the automatic split to be north-south. I can adjust this boundary to be east-west. And once I save this, it will take that new version. And the same thing with this field, I'm going to call this east, but now I want this shape to be run, or the split to be run east-west. So I'll grab the vertices and do so. Now when I save this field, you see the two different versions. But now to make my point about the different seasons, if I toggle back into 2021, you can see it's still treated as one big potato field. Whereas if I go back into 2022, we see the split, and a better use case here might be a different crop. Maybe you've got canola in the west field, and you can see that represented. So that's something you can do if you split. And again, keep in mind that those changes only impact the season that you have highlighted, but the master version of the field will not be impacted. A few other things that we can do is if I jump into a different demo I have set up, we can upload different map layers on behalf of growers. So if you've got, for example, a variable rate seeding map or a variable rate, fertility map that should go down at the time of seeding, we can upload those and use FarmQA as a viewing portal for those layers. So I've got a couple files in my file structure where I'm going to bring them in as map layers. So within this field, once I've clicked on it, and again, I'm within the 2022 season. Now you can see I have no layers uploaded to this field, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a layer. I've pre-created several categories of layer types, one of those being seeding maps. If I select that, I now get the opportunity to bring in a seeding map. So I've got my corn population map that I'm going to drag and drop into the drop zone in FarmQA. This will upload the image. In this case, it's going to take the styling format from GK Technology and automatically show the different zones, the different seeding populations that we can see as we click through the different zones within this file. Now, this is available and visible to the grower as well. As I was saying, this is a way to share that data with them. I'll bring in a second map just to show on the fertility side if you've got a variable rate map. In this case, it's a 2800 seeding map that's going to go down in a mid-row bander. I'm going to bring that file over and drop it into my variable rate section. We note that this one is not automatically styled. There was not a folder within the shapefile to do that, but we can quickly style it within FarmQA. You can view my previous webinars on additional details on how to do this, but I'm going to use a custom color ramp. I'm going to run this from red to green, and it will automatically find the min and max ranges of this file. So now if I save this, it will color to match that color ramp, and now we can see the different rates of nitrogen that will be going on during seeding. Now, the other thing that I will show is going back to the boundary management. We talked about splits. One thing that came to light while I was uploading these boundaries is you can see my boundary reflects the more of a simplified shape, where in reality the planting does not go through this low spot. So what I have is I've got a shape file that I can use to update this boundary. So instead of adjusting those vertices like I did in the split scenario, we can instead take a KML or a shape file, and we can drag and drop into the edit window. We can drag and drop a KML, and now we'll note that it updates the boundary. Well, first of all, it will preview to make sure that these are the changes I do want to make. But when I click save, it will take all the updates to that boundary and apply it to this season. So if this is a scenario where if out of a different system, out of QGIS, out of ArcMap, things like that, you've got boundaries, you can upload them to update the shapes that you will see within FarmQA. Another thing to note when talking about files, so what I've done with these seeding maps and the variable rate maps, this is a way that you can share the data within FarmQA with a grower, with an operator, and this allows them to view it both on a web view and on a mobile view. But if you want to share the file where they could actually download it and upload it to in a cab to one of their monitors, what you can do is you can actually attach files within FarmQA. So what I've done is I clicked on this field called seeding, and I've dropped that file into the current growing season. So now they would have both versions of the shape file. You can see now, if you look back at this field, it will have two attachments in the 2022 season. And if the grower clicked on it, they would see those two files, which they could then click and download themselves. So you can think of FarmQA as a data transfer portal as well. Okay, moving on to looking at in more detail what crops to assign and how we can do that. We have added in a crop planning view or crop rotation view, and this will be new to any users that are currently using FarmQA, but instead of clicking the Fields tab, we're going to click on the crop rotation view. Now what this provides is a column representing each year you've had a season within FarmQA. And what I'll do is I'm going to clean this up so you can see that once I click on columns, I get the opportunity to remove columns or add columns in that are not previously included. So let's say I don't care about 2016. Now the columns are cleaned up. And what you see from this view is, like I was saying, a year represented by columns, and the rows are the fields. We have a toggle at the top right where you can choose to show the crop colors. And then the pie charts will show the acreage breakdown by crop, and then the number of fields in each crop, along with any of your totals up here as well, as far as total acres planted, fields planted, etc. Now, the reason I point this out is this would be my recommended way of relaying a crop plan to a grower going into a current year. The way I would do that is you can filter this view and then export it, or they can view it directly within FarmQA. A few of the things I would recommend is, first of all, in 2022, if you click on the header, you will now see that this column sorts. So you can see which fields are going to be in beets versus barley. An additional sort that we can do is if we grab the organization column, I'm going to drop that into this blue cell at the top, and now we can see this broken down by the operations in my account. So just for reference, if I show my grower farm field tree in my demo account, the units that I have would be Minnesota farm and North Dakota farm. Those are now being broken down within the rotation view, and I can see Minnesota farm has 21 fields versus ND has 53. And then within here, I get the breakdown of what's being planted. Now, we can also do a secondary grouping. So if I grab the 2022 year, and I'm going to drop that into the cell. And now if I turn that column back on, you can see there's a grouping of within Minnesota farms, how many fields are going to be barley, how many fields are going to be beets, with the automatic area calculated. So now you as an operator of multiple growers can see this view broken down, and you can easily toggle between entities. Another view, if you want to just break this down for across all your operations, or perhaps you search and you only look for Minnesota farm. Now what you can do is, if we just group by 2022 with the drag and drop, now again we get that breakdown of how many fields are planted into each crop with the area total. So from this view, I'm going to toggle back on my 2022 season so I can see that. And now if I export this to Excel, this is a good roll-up of that data that can be displayed back to a user, to a grower in a planning phase. So if I zoom in, you can see what fields are going to go into beets in this case. So you can see field 115. I have a numeric naming system in my demo account. You can also see the acreage associated to each crop. And then the totals are down here, so you know how many acres are going to go into each crop. This can be easily adjusted, so we can go back and do the whole assignment process that I did initially, and then this can be generated again. It can be viewed in real time as you're making changes if you need to optimize to a certain total acreage per crop. Another thing that I should point out is that on the top right, you can also, instead of coloring and showing this by crop, we can also show this by variety. So now I still have this sorted in 2022, where you can see how many fields are going into this particular American Crystal beet variety, for example. And if we do that group by, these will now group by the different varieties instead of just the different crops. So that's the crop rotation view and a key piece to our crop planning. Another thing that I do want to call out and draw attention to is if you want to make decisions based on, let's say, 2021's scouting data, anything you saw in the field that may impact what crops you assign, what chemicals you apply in 2022. A great way to do that is within our analytics view. And what I'll point out here is if I go back into the 2021 season, and we're going to look back at what I saw in my cornfields for this particular example. So I've clicked on the report tab and I'm going to group this by crop. So if I drag this to the top and then I'm going to search by corn so that my data is filtered down. Now what we see is I had 21 cornfields in the year 2021. And as I look across the columns, you can see the data that was captured throughout the year, or this data can be populated through imports from things like soil labs, yield quality data, etc. But then what I would point out in this view is if we want to filter down, and perhaps there's a couple different metrics that would impact what you plant, what you spray, you can be viewing that. So I'm going to take out a couple of different columns within this view. And now this is a simplified view with just fewer columns. I can look at my yields per field if you want to decide what varieties to put. Maybe your best varieties go in your best fields. You can sort by variety and see which fields are best yielding. But what I wanted to point out, perhaps a more applicable example would be looking at rootworms. If you want to, again, look at your cornfields where you saw rootworm pressure, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to use this filter and I'm going to use the option of greater than and say any field that had greater than 20% damage of rootworms, I want to see what those were. Again, think about this as across a lot of acres, you can filter down to particular scenarios. And now perhaps this would be a scenario where I would assign my BT specific variety that I added in my demo. So what I'll do is I'll export this to Excel just for the time being, but I want to show you one more view that would be helpful in a planning phase. Is the metric designer allows you to also see this data set spatially. So this is a different scenario where I'm looking at aphid pressure, but the color coding is going to correspond to pressure values. In this case, green would correspond to a low pressure field, red would be high. So if you wanted to make the decisions on, for example, where to put your premium package sprays or higher rates of certain chemicals, you could be viewing a spatial view to better understand that. The other opportunity we can do or get at through this view is by using line charts. And what I've shown here is my yield by variety. So again, mentioning the varieties by crop, you can see which fields perform the best. But what I've done now is I've selected yield as the trait that I want to display in my line graph. I've selected my crop, and then I can group this by different things. Variety is what I have shown now, and this would be a scenario where I was doing yield assessments, yield checks leading up to harvest. Again, you could also import this data from a spreadsheet. I can group this by crop. In this case, I only have corn selected, or I can group it by farm just to showcase a couple other options here. All this would contribute back into an assignment process, but what I want to showcase now is if you do have that Excel sheet where, if you recall, I exported out my cornfields where we were dealing with rootworm issues, which is represented by column J. So what I'll do here is we'll just look at the fields, and I could have done this in FarmQA, but I'll just clean up some of the other cells so you can see which fields had rootworm issues. If I go into split screen mode, this is where we could pull up and we could get into a crop assignment view. So we're in the 2022 year, so I toggle over and let's search for field 231. And we know that this field, for example, needs to get that BT variety to combat the issues with rootworm. So I can search, first of all, I can search BT. And if you have that in your naming convention of your varieties, this will pull up a list of all the varieties that have that BT trait in it, which you can then assign to the field. So that would be a way that you can combine both that analytics view with things that you found in season with the assignment process. Same thing would go for that spatial view. If you wanted to pull that up as well in a split screen mode, would be a good way to assign that. Now, very quickly, I'll hit on a scenario of doing chemical planning going into a future season. And we can hit on this in more detail in future webinars. But a scenario is if you want to build up your mixes to have your spray plans going into the 2022 season. So I've built up some corn post-emerge applications, just grabbed some random chemicals, and then I've done that for the pre-emerge, post-emerge, and a fungicide application. What I'll do now is from the web, we can select a certain field. So I'm going to pick on this field 125 East. And when I select that, I'm going to assign my corn pre-emerge to this. So we've got the chemical combination with the rates. It will pre-populate on this view because we have that pre-built as a mix. It brings in the water volumes. And now we can set a start date. So if we want to say roughly, we do have to pick a date in this, but since it's pre-emerge and we say that in the chemicals, you can say spray pre-emerge and then add this. Now, if I do that same thing, I'm going to grab the same field, 125 East. And again, you could be doing this in bulk. So if you have a series of corn fields and you could search this by corn, you would see that you can be giving the same recommendations, the same mixes to 5, 10, 20 corn fields at the same time. But just picking on this one field again, I'm going to do the post-emerge. And when I do this, I will get a different chemical combination. And I will say post-emerge, but assign this a little bit later in the season. So we'll say this is maybe May. And then to round this out, I will also do my fungicide application. So we'll say field 125. I'm going to select my mix, which I've got my corn fungicide pre-built out. Now I'll say this is late season fungicide, and again, give this a final date. Now, once this is all defined, you can see within the 2022 year, we can see everything we've planned to do on this field. And if we filter by the start date, this is a way that you can see, first we need to make this I mix these up. Post-emerge, this should be pre-emerge, but you can see what order you're supposed to spray these in. You could you could click in to see the details per spray, saying this is my post-emerge spray. You could thumb through these to see within controller, within our view of what needs to be sprayed. If you want to get a roll-up product total, you can also select all three of these fields, and we can generate this as a PDF. And once I do that, it's going to show what we call a shopping cart. So it's going to have your product totals. So again, think about this from a purchasing perspective of here's all your chemicals. This is going across 3 different sprays we're going to do on this field, and you can see the product totals needed. Then, as we scroll down, you'll also be able to see the details week by week or day by day, what you plan to spray. And then that would be accessible to the grower. They could then mark it as completed, which would then update the date in here of when it actually happened with the wind speed, wind direction, etc. So with that, I think I'm coming up on my time limit here. If you've got questions, please reach out. We'd love to work with you in a planning phase of your operation, and there's a lot of functionality available here. There's certainly more that we're building out that can pertain in this conversation. We do have a SurveyMonkey that someone will post in the chat from my team, and we'd love to hear what else you guys want to hear from us about what functionality you're interested in seeing in this webinar series. With that said, we're open to questions, so if anybody has anything now, I would love to address your questions. If there are none, I really appreciate you joining. We will be posting this webinar to YouTube as well, so you can watch that, share it with others, and watch that again. If you want to see anything in more detail, you'd be able to do that. So again, thank you for the time, and please tune in for future webinars. Thank you.